All of this analysis, moreover, is consistent with the 33 AD date we have suggested for our Lord's sacrificial death on the cross and subsequent resurrection. For not only does Passover of 33 AD seem the soundest date when derived independently, but it is also the date at which one arrives when adding the 3½ years' length of Christ's ministry to the starting point of that ministry as analyzed. That is, Passover of 33 AD is 3½ years later than September, October of 29 AD, the commencement of his ministry as indicated. That Christ's earthly ministry stretched beyond 3 years is clear from the chronological information provided in the Gospels, especially in the Gospel of John. Following his baptism and temptation in the wilderness, Jesus' earthly ministry formally commenced before a Passover, John 2:13, spanned 2 further Passovers, John 2:13 and 5:1, and ended with his crucifixion at the time of Passover as well, John 11:55. This gives us a duration for his ministry of 3½ years, which fact, calculating from his baptism in September-October of AD 29, places his crucifixion in March-April of AD 33. To recap our conclusions, John's ministry began in circa September-October of 28 AD and ended with his death in March-April of 32 AD. Jesus' ministry tracks exactly 1 year later, beginning in September-October of 29 AD and ending with his death and resurrection in March-April of 33 AD. As noted at the beginning of this section, the period of Christ's earthly life is the centerpiece of God's chronological design of human history. It is the fullness of times, Galatians 4:4, and the conjunction of the ages, Hebrews 9:26. It is a 33-year interlude in the progression of the 7 millennial days, which marks the termination of the Jewish age, Mark 1:15, and the commencement of the Church age, Matthew 21:43. This 33-year interval, the exact period of time that David, a type of his coming son, reigned in Jerusalem, is a grace period around which the rest of human history pivots, so to speak. For in it, Jesus Christ was offered to the world, but the world rejected him. From a chronological point of view, therefore, Christ's birth is the critical departure point for calculating God's historical timetable backward, while the date of his death and resurrection is the basis from which to reckon the scheme of history that follows. Having established 2 BC and 33 AD as the best dates for these 2 seminal events respectively, it shall now be our purpose to work backwards from the former and forwards from the latter to explore with as much precision as possible the specific dates to which the biblical record points in respect to the 7 millennial days of human history, for the year of Christ's birth and the year of his crucifixion mark the terminus of the preceding Jewish age and inception of the following Church age, respectively. Days 4 and 3 and 2 and 1. As we have seen, the age of the Gentiles, Jewish age and Church age all comprise 2 millennial day pairs. Working backward from the birth of Christ in 2 BC, the biblical record is consistent with a precise 4,000-year period. Our 2 double millennial day pair ages, the Jewish age and the age of the Gentiles, to the fall of Adam, when certain points, noted in the chart, are taken into consideration. The age of Israel still has 7 years to run, that is Daniel's 70th week, otherwise known as the Tribulation, Daniel 9:27. Therefore, only 1993 years are to be found in Israel's 2 millennial days. The Babylonian captivity, 586 to 516 BC, does not count against the 2,000 years of the Jewish age, because for that 70-year period, Israel's functioning as God's mechanism for the distribution of his divine truth was being held in abeyance. With these 2 caveats in mind, it is possible to track the biblical evidence back to Adam's creation. The list to be given uses the critical scriptural references to move the chronology backward, step by step, from the birth of Christ in 2 BC. The Jewish age, 2065 to 2 BC. To 1444 BC, the Exodus. retrogressing 1442 years from 2 BC to the Exodus in 1444 BC based upon 1 Kings 6. 1 which states that the fourth year of King Solomon's reign, circa 964 BC, occurred 480 years after the Exodus, circa 1444 BC, that is, 964 plus 480 equals 1444. To 1874 BC, Jacob in Egypt. Retrogressing from 1444 BC a further 430 years to the time of Jacob's arrival in Egypt, based upon Exodus 12:40, which states that Israel remained in Egypt after Jacob's arrival exactly 430 years, and thus taking us to 1874 BC. To 2004 BC, Jacob's birth. Retrogressing from 1874 BC a further 130 years to Jacob's birth, based upon Genesis 47:9, where Jacob tells Pharaoh on his arrival in Egypt that he is 130 years old. To 2064 BC, Isaac's birth. Retrogressing from 2004 BC a further 60 years to the birth of Isaac, based upon Genesis 25:26, where we learn that Isaac was 60 when Jacob was born. To 2065 BC, Abraham's circumcision. Retrogressing from 2064 BC 1 year to the circumcision of Abraham, the event which marks the beginning of the Jewish age, Genesis 17 and 18. Subtracting from 2065 2 years for the birth of Christ in 2 BC and 70 years for the Babylonian captivity, we are left with 1993 years, the entire 2 millennial days of the Jewish age, minus the 7 years of Daniel's 70th week, the yet future tribulation. The age of the Gentiles, 4065 to 2065 BC. To 2164 BC, Abraham's birth. Retrogressing 99 years from 2065 to the birth of Abraham, based upon Genesis 17:24. To 2456 BC, the flood. Retrogressing 292 years from 2164 to the Great Flood by adding the intervals between generations from Abraham to Shem, based upon Genesis 11:10 through 26. To 3056 BC, Noah's birth. Retrogressing 600 years to the birth of Noah by adding the intervals between generations from Shem to Noah, based upon Genesis 7:6 and 7:11 and 8:14. To 4112 BC, Adam's creation. Retrogressing 1056 years to the creation of Adam by adding the intervals between generations from Noah to Adam, based upon Genesis 5:3 through 29. Allowing exactly 2,000 years for age of the Gentiles from 2065 to 4065, and subtracting the latter figure from 4112, we posit that Adam sinned and was expelled from the garden at the chronological age of 47. That is, he was already mature when created, then fell 47 years after his mature creation. 4112 minus 4065 equals 47. Days 5 and 6. Working forward 2 complete 1,000-year periods from 33 AD, the year of our Lord's crucifixion and resurrection, would bring us to the year 2033 AD as the date of our Lord's return and the beginning of his millennial reign. Subtracting 7 years from this total gives us the year 2026 AD as the time of the commencement of the 7-year tribulational period. Although our Lord's crucifixion and resurrection occurred in the spring at the time of Passover, the tribulation will begin with the cycle of festivals occurring in the fall. The 6th-month hiatus between the spring and fall of 2026 AD constitute the half-hour of silence, Revelation 8:1, the final grace period before the commencement of that great hour of testing begins, Revelation 3:10. The breakpoints of the 3 pairs of days. As has been noted, the Gentile, Jewish, and Church ages, though consisting of 2 millennial days each, are integral wholes. Thus, it is not unexpected that these 3 pairs of millennial days, that is, 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, should have no hard and fast event breaks to clearly separate and distinguish their two 1,000-year periods. This phenomenon of no clear breaks within these three pairs of days is in sharp contrast to the very definite breaks that separate the other divisions of the 7-day scheme. That is, the fall of Adam as the start of the Gentile age, the circumcision of Abraham as the start of the Jewish age, the birth of Christ as the temporary conclusion to the Jewish age, the death and resurrection of Christ as the start of the Church age, and the return of Christ as the conclusion to the Church age and Jewish age. This lack of any comparably significant break within the 3-day pairs is all the more understandable when one considers, in addition to the fact that each pair is part of an essentially indivisible contiguous whole, the truly pivotal nature of the divisions between the 3 pairs, mentioned above, for these are dividing points which frame in a most significant way God's architecture of the 7 millennial days of human history. The fall of Adam, the initial promise of the Messiah, Genesis 3:15 and 3:21. The circumcision of Abraham, the specific promise of the seed, Genesis 17, 1 through 27. The birth of Christ, the Word becomes flesh, John 1:14. The death and resurrection of Christ, the promise of salvation fulfilled, 2 Corinthians 1:19 and 20. The return of Christ, the resurrection and the kingdom, Revelation 20, 4 through 6. Still, it is true that while no exact breakpoint exists within each of the 3-day pairs, at roughly the halfway point of each pair we find a period of transition which does mark the shift in character between each respective day.